abducted in Bangladesh. A new report blames the government for the disappearance of hundreds of people. I'm Shuli Ghosh, and today's newsmaker is Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. In Bangladesh, authorities stand accused of being involved in the abduction of their own citizens. A recent report by Human Rights Watch says at least 90 people went missing last year, including family members of opposition politicians. But it's not the first time these claims have been made. In 2014, relatives of the disappeared took to the streets, demanding answers about their loved ones. Bangladeshi human rights groups say about 300 people have gone missing since Sheikh Hasina's government came to power in 2009. Some of the missing have re-emerged, but the UN's Human Rights Committee says it's concerned about reports that police and soldiers have committed a large number of extrajudicial killings. It's calling on the government to investigate, but Bangladeshi leaders have dismissed the allegations as nothing more than a smear campaign. Well, joining me now to discuss this further from London is Bangladeshi political analyst Khalifa Malik. Also in London is Kirsty Brimelow. She's the chairwoman of the Bar Human Rights Committee of England and Wales. And from Dhaka is journalist Tanveer Chowdhury. A warm welcome to all my guests. Khalifa, let me start with you because you're the friend of Farhad Mazhar. He says he was abducted. He was later found. What is he saying about his experience and why does he think he was taken?
Right. It was a very tragic incident because Farhad was abducted, I think it was on the 3rd of July or 4th of July. Some people took him away in front from his house in early morning, and after one day, next day, he was recovered from about 200 miles from an area in the west of Bangladesh. Since he came back, he faced a lot of problem, and actually the government did not clarify its position. There was some sort of vague statement by the police authorities saying that, Farhad Mazhar went on his own or something like that, and they also got an woman to testify against him. But nobody would believe that, because in Bangladesh, the police statement is notoriously wrong. It's very difficult to believe them.
Yeah, the police are essentially saying that Farhad made all of this up. What is Farhad saying about who he thinks took him or who might be behind this? Because he's one of the very few people who are actually talking about this experience.
Now, this is at this point. I thought I bring this point later on, but since you asked this question, this is very, very important, and I don't think many people would realize that. Farhad Mazhar, there are other people who were abducted before, and later on they were found. Not many of them were fortunate because many of them were killed. But anyway, since they were returned alive, they became basically voiceless because they are threatened to not to disclose anything, or something happened to them. And he's not the first instance. So many people are saying that the security agencies or whoever, some people are trying to change the brain of some of the abductees, either by sound wave or drug or some other thing, and that would be a really new phenomena. I tell this because
or it may just be that people are too scared to speak, Khalifa. Let me bring Kirsty in because
he's not saying anything. He's not saying anything, absolutely anything.
Very, very worrying allegations of forced abductions. Let me just ask Kirsty, because her organisation is also concerned about the whereabouts of an opposition lawyer, Amir Ahmed bin Qasim. So you obviously relate to what Khalifa has been saying. Your organisation is looking for someone who has, to all intents and purposes, disappeared without trace.
Yes, I mean, with Mr. Qasam's case, it's even more concerning because, in fact, he is a lawyer. He's also a qualified barrister here in England and Wales, and that is why the Bar Council, together with the Bar Human Rights Committee last year, issued a statement shortly after his disappearance, setting out that Bangladesh had a responsibility to look into his whereabouts and to reassure his family and those just simply publicly as to what has happened to him. Now, since August the 9th of last year, there has been nothing as to where he has gone. And he was defending his father in the ICT, so in the International Crimes Tribunal. And so not only was he an abduction of a civilian, but he also was further than that. It was actually an abduction of a lawyer who was doing his duty in carrying out the defence of his father before the tribunal. So
when you've looked at the wider issue of
real concern,
disappearances, is there a pattern about who is being targeted, who's going missing?
Yes, I mean, there seems to be a pattern of those who are opposing or who are criticising the ruling party, and they appear to be targeted. Now, the Bangladesh government obviously doesn't accept this, and in fact says, for example, with a more recent report from Human Rights Watch, that this is propaganda that is being used to smear Bangladesh. Now, if that is so, we would expect, and the Bangladeshi people would expect, a transparent inquiry into where all these people have gone, in which case. And yet one of the difficulties that we have, and we have a number of events, we've had them as part of the all-parliamentary groups within Parliament in the UK, and one of the difficulties has been the lack of engagement with those in government positions, such as the High Commissioner from Bangladesh in London. Now, he hasn't attended meetings that have been held to discuss these issues, which are real serious breaches of international law. OK.
Tanveer, human rights groups are blaming Sheikh Hasina and her government for these disappearances. How is she and her government responding?
Well, I can't quite speak on behalf of them, but as a journalist, of course, I've got to see both sides of the issue. The government on its part says that, look, these are nothing more than, as our guest has also pointed out, this propaganda and smear campaign against the government, those who oppose them. Now, this Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch USA, the United Nations, even the American Human Rights Report have criticized the government for not doing anything about the disappearance. The government Home Minister Asaduzzaman Khan recently said that, look, a lot of these people who disappeared are actually people who are bank defaulter, younger students who are actually joining militants group. They have disappeared since the Holy Artisan Cafe tragedy in July last year. There's a lot of these youngsters from expensive private universities have gone underground and are shaking hands with the militant groups. They're blaming this outfit among the missing people. And they're even saying some people are voluntarily disappearing for personal reason.
Yeah, in fact, Tanveer, let me just add to what you're saying, because this is what the Home Minister, Asaduzzaman Khan, said about that Human Rights Watch report last month. He said, this organisation launched a smear campaign against us. Many businessmen went into hiding, failing to repay their loans in this country. Some people went missing after developing extramarital relationships. Tanveer, does that sound like a sensible explanation?
Well, logically, no, because the fact remains, you got to see, the government also says that the opposition, they always bring that the opposition when they were in power, the Bangladesh Nationalist Party from 2001 to 2006, they have started this act of disappearance and extrajudicial killing. Now, there might be some incidents were there, of course, during those periods, but we are talking from 2008 till now. This ruling party has been in power. There's been an extreme rise of extrajudicial killing, what the government called crossfire or shootout with elements, while they're even taken from jail to another police station. They saw on the road, a particular convoy was attacked by extremist elements and the particular convict was killed. These are lame excuses essentially put up by the government. You were talking about Mr. Farhad Mazhar, who's a very prominent writer and a political figure here. I personally didn't know him. When he left the house, there's CCTV footage. He left without a bag. He was found with a bag with him. There's other CCTV footage which the government says shows he was totally fine in Kunla. But those who actually reappeared, strangely, where none of them went to the media to give statement. That's a very strange thing, because several people actually reappeared after some time, and none of them were able to give any statement. Essentially, people thinking they were told that you cannot go to the media with any statement. So we don't know what really was the cause and effect of this disappearance.
And that's the problem, isn't it? Khalifa, do we know who's actually physically carrying out these abductions? Because witnesses are blaming branches of the Bangladeshi police, the Rapid Action Battalion, the RAB, or the detective branch, DB. But the problem is, of course, these people are doing this, not identifying themselves and not carrying warrants. So do we know for sure that the Bangladeshi police are involved?
Actually, it is the duty of the government to clarify this, but the government does not. Actually, coming back to Farhad Mazhar case, the first reaction of Asaduzzaman Khan, the Home Minister, was, we are fortunate that he was not taken across the border. About 1 or 2 days, the Inspector General of Police, Mr. Shahidul Haq, he came to say, oh, it was he went this and that. So their story is obviously concocted. Certainly nobody would take that statement seriously. Now, before that, I cite one example. Like there was one lady, advocate Rizwan, Bangladesh Environmental Lawyers Association. Her husband was abducted a few years back, and he was returned. Now, that husband was not any political figure or any writer or any intellectual or any journalist. And he has been totally shot. He's as good as physically he's alive, but he's intellectually and otherwise socially dead. Now, there are other people, similar people, who were returned. Now, look at even Brigadier Azmi. What was his fault? There was no case against him. His father was an accused in the case that the government brought for war crimes and all this. But Brigadier Azmi, he was an excellent, very brilliant army officer. He was dismissed from the army, and then he was taken from his own house in front of his relatives, from his family. Everybody saw it in the daylight. Now, who did it? Obviously, when they come mostly, in most cases, with a microbus, white microbus, with more than 5-6 people, and they have the authority.
Okay, so what are we saying? Are we saying that the government is ordering these, or are we saying the government's turning a blind eye?
Please let me finish this point. There are also, it is my hunch, there are also non-governmental actors like vigilante groups. Maybe, I'm not certain, but government has to explore that. Sometimes they say we are not involved. Then it is their duty to find out who is involved. Obviously, there could be some vigilante groups who work outside the legal, like police or RAB or other law authorities.
Let me put this to...
So there could be vigilante groups like you saw in South America, Argentina, and many other countries, in Cambodia, many other countries, they've got this culture. Certainly we hate this culture coming back in Bangladesh, if there is any.
Kirsty,
it is government must stop all these things.
Let me ask about the human rights picture in Bangladesh, because Khalifa is raising this point that, that there are groups that may or may not be sanctioned by the government, that there is a crackdown on anyone who disagrees with the government. Clearly, we can't say, right, the government is definitely behind this. That does seem to be the picture that a lot of human rights groups are pointing at. But what does this say about the human rights conditions in Bangladesh right now and how it affects democracy?
Well, it's extremely worrying because obviously there is a duty upon Bangladesh to investigate. So it's extremely worrying, first of all, of a blanket dismissal of complaints as being propaganda, because what you would expect is an assurance that any disappearances will be investigated and evidence looked at in order to then put forward the case as to whether these are splinter groups, whether they are rogue criminal elements, or whether it is something entirely different. But a simple dismissal of all of these cases, and there are many, up to 300 is reporting, and there's plenty of evidence supporting that, A simple dismissal doesn't show that the state is taking its international law duties and in order to protect
so should there be more pressure on the government to hold an investigation? I mean, the UN's called for one, hasn't it?
There should be. Yes, the UN, I mean, various bodies at the UN have repeatedly criticised Bangladesh's reaction to not only the enforced disappearances, but also there's been reference to extrajudicial killings, but also the various clampdowns that are said to be occurring in terms of freedom of expression. And that also is coming through with some of the recent laws that we are seeing being passed in Bangladesh. So there should be more international pressure because Bangladesh has ratified one of the major treaties, the ICCPR, where Bangladesh is promising the other states that it will protect its citizens and carry out investigations where there appears to be violations of its citizens' rights. And here we have the most grave allegations as to what is going on, and yet a simple blanket dismissal from Bangladesh rather than a proper, transparent investigation as to what has happened to these people.
Tanveer, does the Bangladeshi government have any appetite for an investigation? Does it feel that it's under pressure by the international community to look into these disappearances?
Well, I'm sure they're concerned about the public relation aspect of it. I don't know how much leverage the international community has on this government, because this government in 2014 election came without a popular mandate. It was an election by default of constitutional default, and the opposition didn't participate. So it is under pressure from the general population also to come up with a legitimate election. Taking the greater picture, these issues needs to be faced by the government down the road, because it's not just UN, it's all the human rights bodies, local and international. Having said that, they do have some legitimate concern because there's been recent threat of militants in the country, so they do have to crack down pretty hard way on that. And one of our guests brought the topic of abduction. I have to say there has been cases of abduction and extortion by independent group, which has nothing to do with government. We cannot verify that independently, but there has been cases where people have been abducted and extortion were demanded. In some cases, detective police were actually caught red-handed doing that. So that is also an ambiguous situation. I want to bring two particular cases, which is very strange. Two major opposition party leaders. One was the Mr. Salahuddin Ahmed, who was abducted or kidnapped or whatever, was found in India in the state of Assam after many, many months. And this is very strange, because how someone ends up in India under Indian custody, and yet Bangladesh government totally denied that anything to do with it.
Tanveer, we're going to have to leave it there because we have run out of time, but clearly there are a lot of issues at stake here in Bangladesh and a lot of questions still to be answered. Thank you very much indeed to all three of my guests, Khalifa Malik, Kirsty Brimelow and Tanveer Chowdhury. Coming up in a moment, why the world's tech giants are fighting over the future of artificial intelligence. And we speak with the Secretary General of the Norwegian Refugee Council. He says rich countries give an embarrassingly small amount of help to the world's neediest people.
What's the number of refugees accepted by other countries? You see, some have taken in 100, others 300, 500, 1,000. I'm sorry, but the word full is not written on our forehead. We are patient to a certain point, then we will do what's necessary. These buses and planes aren't waiting here for nothing. The ones that give us this advice should also give it to other member countries of the United Nations, so we can send some of these refugees to those countries. But when we say this, they become uncomfortable.
The Secretary-General of the Norwegian Refugee Council says many of the world's richest countries are the least supportive when it comes to helping displaced people. Jan Egeland made headlines when he told Turkish media that Europe and the United States are making what he called embarrassingly small efforts to support refugees. And while countries such as Turkey and Lebanon have together taken in more than 4 million refugees, other countries resist accepting even a fraction of that number. Well, Jan joins me now from Oslo. Good to have you with us. So the richest countries are the least generous when it comes to refugees. Why do you think that is?
Well, they are indeed the least generous in terms of receiving refugees and giving protection on their soul, whereas Turkey is the most generous in absolute numbers. 3.5 million refugees now get protection in Turkey. That is fantastic. Lebanon, small place, well over 1 million. Of course, many of the so-called rich countries, my own country, Norway for that matter, is generous in providing aid, providing resources for our humanitarian relief in the field. But, you know, why aren't we opening our borders and giving safe haven here? Well, I think there is a bit of xenophobia. I think there is a fear for refugees that is creeping in too many places. And it's a shame, really, because we should all know that those people fleeing could be you and me, my family. We need more countries to open their borders.
Well, I think you've hit the nail on your head. A lot of countries would say that the issue of migrants and refugees is a political issue. It's also a security issue. Countries in the EU have, of course, set aside budgets to try and look after the people that reach their shores, and they've got a quota system in place. Are you saying that this isn't enough?
Yeah, well, the quota system doesn't work, really. I mean, the European Union were supposed to really alleviate Italy and Greece with quotas, receiving people. But it's true that was said initially in your segment here. I mean, there are European countries who have taken 100, 200, 300 refugees and have not taken their part of the quotas that the European Union said would be allocated according to size and economy and so on throughout Europe. What we need is a burden sharing, or rather a responsibility sharing system globally, where all of the countries, at least 100 of the 200 countries on Earth, could receive refugees, including all of Europe, North America, many Asian countries. And if we then, on the basis of such a responsibility sharing system, ask the High Commissioner for Refugees to say who's really in need of protection, we could have solved this tremendous refugee challenge.
But what we're seeing are measures from Europe to try and reduce the number of refugees coming to their countries. What do you think about Italy's plan to send ships to Libyan waters to try and stop people smuggling, to try and stop people crossing the Mediterranean?
Well, nobody likes people smugglers, and it's an abhorrent thing. They profit from smuggling desperate human beings. But the problem is that is the persecution, it's the fear, it's what drives people out. We need to look at peace work, at humanitarian work, at development work in the countries of origin. Italy is in a very difficult situation. It is not helped sufficiently by the rest of Europe. Same for Greece. These countries feel that they are the end destination of those people who come from North Africa or through the Middle East. We need summit meetings where leaders meet and say, can we sit down together and help people together and not specialize in barbed fences and building walls around the national borders.
I know this is something that you get very frustrated about, and it's not just about finding a place for these people to go. It's about offering them, a quality of life, an education, employment. And to that end, you've praised Turkey for its role in trying to help Syrian refugees get into, down some of those paths.
Yes, indeed. I mean, I was just now in Turkey. I met with the Turkish ministries of Foreign Affairs, of Interior, and with AFAD, the Turkish Civil Defense Organization. I was impressed by Turkey not only saying we have received 3.5 million refugees, 3 of them million from Syria, but also that we will give them access to our school system, have given us access to the public school system, to the public health system, and we will allow them to work in Turkey, employment. That is an example to other countries. There are, even among those who are generously in opening their border, it's not the same generosity in saying you can work in our country, you can access our public health and educational systems.
Yeah, I know the Norwegian Refugee Council has been working with Syrian refugees in Turkey. What about helping Syrians across the border in Syria? I mean, some of them are in really bad situations, and it's really difficult to reach some of those areas with humanitarian assistance, isn't it?
It is. I mean, a refugee doesn't want to become a refugee. They want to stay at home. Most of them want to return home as soon as possible. So we do enormous efforts to help Syrians inside Syria, both before they are displaced so that they can avoid being displaced, and internally displaced people so that they can get adequate support within Syria and are able to return to their places of origin. Then we help neighboring countries. We've been able to do good work in Turkey, but even larger scale and for a longer time in Lebanon, in Jordan, and in Iraq. We want to help the host societies. We need more funding to help the host societies. All in all, it's not hopeless. We can solve the refugee crisis, but then we need more money, we need more peace efforts, we need more development efforts, and we really need more support for those who are host communities today. And we need more countries to open up for quota refugees whom we cannot help locally or in the neighborhood of their problems.
There was a chink of light in the conflict in Syria recently when the de-conflict zones were agreed, several areas where the fighting was reduced or erased completely. Are you confident that they will hold and that maybe they can be built on at future negotiations which are coming up?
Well, it is indeed a glimmer of hope that there are these so-called de-escalation zones, de-escalation of the violence it's supposed to be. These are zones agreed upon in negotiations between Russia, Turkey, and Iran. Also in the south, the United States and Jordan have been involved. I think it is very welcome that external powers, both the regional powers and global powers, are investing more in bringing parties to the negotiating table and de-escalate the violence, because too many parties have brought fuel to this fire by supporting armed men fighting each other and hurting civilians. So indeed, I think that 2017 will be a good year towards the end of this year. I think more people will get assistance. I think there will be less violence, and I think there will be less attacks against civilians. It can only get better because it has been so bad for such a long time. Remember, the Syrian war has lasted longer now than the Second World War.
Another conflict, of course, is Yemen. I know that you've come back from a recent trip in Yemen. You were visibly shocked, I think, by the level of suffering that you saw there. You called it a man-made catastrophe. Do you think the wider world is now waking up, and we've called it the forgotten war. Do you think the wider world is now waking up to exactly just how bad things are in Yemen?
Well, I hope so, but we're still waiting, really. Yemen has fallen a bit in the shadow of the cataclysmic wars in Syria and in Iraq. I mean, the Aleppo and Mosul has gotten attention. The battle scene in Yemen hasn't really. Yemen is, to start with, much poorer than Syria and Iraq. The people there were on rock bottom when the conflict started. Then there has been boycotts and sanctions against the whole society. The public sector is not running at all anymore. And there is a shortage of food, so that millions of people are threatened with famine, and then they get cholera on top of that. It's an exponential increase in the number of cholera victims. When I was there a couple of months ago, I could see the first cholera victims coming into some hospitals. Today, there are tens of thousands all over the scene. It has to stop. There has to be more attention, and there has to be more resources coming into Yemen. And there has to be an end to this senseless conflict, and also to the sanctions against Yemen as a society.
Can I ask you a personal question? Because there aren't many people who would have your job, UN Special Advisor, head of the Norwegian Refugee Council. You know, you see some of the very worst of humanity and some of the very worst suffering in this world. Do you ever wake up in the morning and just despair?
Well, of course I do, because this is a unique period. I mean, Syria and Yemen are two cases to be mentioned. There are famines also threatening in 3 other countries, Somalia, South Sudan, and Nigeria. But at the same time, as I've seen humanity at our worst, with all of these warlords and dictators and terrorists and others going after the most vulnerable, including women and children, I've also seen humanity at our best. My organization, Norwegian Refugee Council, now has 12,000 people working in the field for us, on the front lines of humanity and for the displaced. And that gives me great hope, really. We can do more good than ever before, but we need to invest more in reaching all, and that is our quest.
Jan, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you. Thank you very much indeed for that, Jan Egeland.
Thank you. Bye.
Now, if you think we're far off from becoming a world where machines and humans battle each other for supremacy, well, you're right, it's not on the horizon just yet. But according to some, and we're talking about some of today's top tech giants, that doomsday scenario isn't just a plotline lifted from the Matrix movies. Basil Rahan explains.
Your world is becoming increasingly intelligent. Everything from your phone to your toaster seems to be getting a mind of its own. Not everyone is happy about it.
Because what's going to happen is robots will be able to do everything better than us. I'm including, all of us, you know.
Two major players in the tech world are at odds over artificial intelligence. Supporters of AI say it is humanity's way to a brighter future, a tool that can help improve the quality of everything from your healthcare to your education. Skeptics fear that path will only lead to disaster, and that besides taking our jobs, the race for AI will eventually produce self-aware technology that learns and progresses millions of times faster than humans. Try to imagine it this way. Your eyes took tens of millions of years to evolve to where they are today. Now think of how far your camera has come in just a few decades. Who do you think would win in an eye test? The worry is that when AI no longer needs human input for its development, it'll progress faster than we can keep up, and it may not go the way we'd like. Doomsayers claim current research is edging us dangerously close to that reality. And when Pandora's box is opened, there's no going back. Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg have both built business empires relying on some form of AI technology. But the Tesla founder says Zuckerberg's understanding of the risks is limited. In turn, Zuckerberg has called Musk's doomsday revelations irresponsible. Zuckerberg and Musk are just two competitors in a race for AI that includes dozens of companies and governments, including many of the world's largest militaries. And in this race, there are no rules.
Well, joining me now from Washington is Christina Wong. She's a military analyst and Pentagon reporter for Breitbart News. Also in Washington, Rudy DeLeon. He's a former U.S. Deputy Defense Secretary and a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress. Good to have both of you with us. Rudy, let me start with you, because AI is such a divisive subject, isn't it? On the one hand, it's going to make all our lives easier. On the other, it's going to take all our jobs. The machines are going to turn on the human race. Killer robots everywhere. Why does it have such conflicting feelings?
I think it has conflicting feelings because it's a change in the way we've been doing business. Robotics, precision manufacturing, we've seen those for many years in the automobile industry. But now the next step, can you have commercial jets that are automatically piloted, some military technologies, the unmanned area vehicles. So we're at the beginning of a major change in the way that the technology works.
Yeah, and I think the point you raise about military technology is really interesting. This is where people become more polarized. I mean, when you move from talking about, I don't know, a fridge that can order you milk when you've run out of milk, to a fully automated combat drone which is able to carry out missions on its own, that's where the debate really raises its head about, you know, how far down this road we should go.
I think it is worrisome, although I think we're a ways off from drones automatically firing by themselves. So right now we're at the very beginning where we're trying to sift through drone data. So there's hours, hundreds, maybe thousands of hours that analysts have to sift through that these drones are collecting. And so artificial intelligence can help us look through that data and we can teach machines to sort of look for ISIS targets or terrorist targets, trucks, people, patterns of life. And so in that way, AI can be quite useful.
Well, can it? Because surely somebody has to program or tell AI what a terrorist looks like or what an ISIS truck looks like. And therein lies one of the problems.
We're using the technology now because we're in 3 different places we can converse. This is a little bit like a sit-room conversation on the military side. But one of the things about the remotely piloted vehicles is that indeed there's a human in the loop. There's a human who's looking at the imagery, trying to look at information coming from the ground, and then the decision to use a weapon, it's the same kind of chain of command as would be for a military aircraft with a pilot on board. So there are humans in the loop. Where the technology goes, I think that's where the revolution is headed. But making sure that the command and control is very legitimate, that it's reliable and that it's accountable, I think is one of the challenges. Yeah,
Christina, this is clearly a priority for the Pentagon, isn't it? The US military already looking at AI for the future of defense. In fact, the Defense Secretary, James Mattis, is visiting Silicon Valley. I know that you're going along on that trip with him. What is it that he's looking for?
So he will first go to the headquarters of Amazon, he'll go to Google, he'll meet with Silicon Valley leaders, and what he's trying to do is build ties between the Pentagon and Silicon Valley. The tech industry is far ahead of the Pentagon and government in terms of artificial intelligence, big data, and all sorts of other capabilities. And so what the Pentagon has to do is to build those bridges. It doesn't quite have the defense budget right now to create things from scratch, nor is that a good idea. So what they're doing is they're trying to work with tech companies, small ones, large ones, to sort of recruit them to help build technologies and bring those technologies into the Pentagon. So he will also be visiting the Defense Innovation Unit experimental.
Yeah, Christina, I wanted to ask about this experimental unit, Defense Innovation Unit experimental. It's pretty close to Google's headquarters, isn't it? 37 pilot projects. What kind of things are they looking at? Is it all really futuristic stuff?
Well, one project I know they're looking at is this thing called, I think, it's sort of, they look like binoculars, but they help operators, troops on the ground, train the sort of the muscles that they're using to think and to operate, and try to train them to actually move and work faster, shoot faster, operate faster. And so that's one of the things. I know that sounds a little scary, but it's so very cool things like that. Very experimental projects that might fail, and they might work. So it's part of this whole new area that the Pentagon's trying to do.
All of this sounds really efficient so far, but Rudy, what's really freaking people out is this idea that you can create artificial intelligence so intelligent, artificial superintelligence, which I know is what they're working towards, which could somehow become sentient. I mean, is that the stuff of sci-fi, or could there be a time when machinery can decide for itself whether to, for example, carry out an attack on an enemy combatant?
Well, those are pretty good themes for some of the Hollywood movies like Transformers that are coming out, but I'd say the Pentagon will take a much more sober path forward. Secretary Mattis, before becoming secretary, was a professor at Stanford, so he certainly knows what's across the street there on Sand Hill Road. Ash Carter, his predecessor from Harvard, also had really started up this lab. And we should also remember that former Defense Secretary Bill Perry was from the Silicon Valley before we even knew that name. I think the Pentagon is going to be step by step. There's going to have to be a human in the loop. And I think it's going to evolve. We've not yet seen what the end state will be, but we know that the Army, with one of their programs, the Future Combat System, really ran into some snags, and Secretary Gates canceled the program. So I think it's going to be step by step, and I think the human in the loop is still going to be decisive.
I think, in fact, it is official policy of the Pentagon, according to the former Defense Secretary, to never allow an artificial intelligence machine to decide whether, for itself, whether or not to kill a human being. But Christina, you see, are we not now in an era of an AI arms race of some kind, where other countries are moving ahead and developing this amazing technology, which means presumably that we can't be constrained by these parameters. We have to follow what our enemies are doing.
That is a great point. China is moving very aggressively into AI. They're investing in U.S. companies. They're investing just enough so that they don't trigger export review. The U.S. government is looking at that. They're trying to look at ways they can perhaps prevent that investment. Since 2012, China has invested, I believe, in there's been 29 investors in AI companies since 2012. So China is definitely moving full speed ahead, and that's something that's something that the Defense Department was concerned about, and is prompting them to hurry up. They created a Project Maven, which is designed to jumpstart investment in AI and try to get those technologies moving in the Pentagon.
I want to ask both of you, because you're both taking a very cool, calm look at what could be available in the future, and I really appreciate that. But then you've got people like Stephen Hawking saying the development of full artificial intelligence could spell the end of the human race. Now, you know, if one of the smartest men alive is saying that he's worried about that, I mean, Rudy, should we be looking at what really smart people are saying that this could lead to?
Well, again, I'll step back to say that this is, one step at a time. It is taking multiple streams of information, systems integration, and bringing it together in both a commercial as well as a national security context.
But is it developing alongside proper regulation?
Space,
is there going to be proper ethical and legal oversight of what's being developed?
The military chain of command is unique. There's nothing like that in the business world that is precisely the same. And as we know, our commanders in the field are accountable. For China, they bristle when you pull and look at the back of your iPhone, because what it says is that it's engineered in California, assembled in China. And so they are trying to develop that key skill on systems integration. I don't think they're there yet. It'll take some time, but they're certainly, as noted by Christine, in a very vigorous mode to catch up.
But if there is this AI arms race, isn't there a fear that countries like China and Russia will go headlong into developing technologies which could one day prove dangerous without the proper controls and oversight?
They're working hard to develop the capabilities, and I'm sure there's another group working just as hard to develop the counter capabilities.
Christina, Rudy talks about the parameters of a military development, but isn't one of the problems that this is moving far beyond the capabilities of the military and into the commercial sector? Aren't private companies taking the lead in this technology?
Yes, and that's something else that we have to address in government. There's quite a bit of cultural resistance. A lot of analysts don't want to outsource their jobs to computers, and understandably so. And there's that trust factor that you mentioned of allowing robots to make decisions. But thankfully, we're not there yet. I guess you can say thankfully, as in terms of jobs, But you're right. Technology is moving, far ahead. The tech industry is moving far faster than the Pentagon, and so this is something, that's really important for the Pentagon to start doing, and that's why you're seeing Secretary Mattis take a trip during his first year to a DUIX hub. It sort of shows the priority of integrating technology into the Pentagon.
Rudy, you were talking about keeping the human judgment in this new technology so that there is always some kind of human control. The Pentagon said last year it was also interested in human-machine unity. They talked about, comparing it to Tony Stark's Iron Man machine, which I think sounds really exciting, where the human mind is in control. But taking it to the extreme, there's also talk about plugging these things directly into the human brain. I guess that means you can bypass boring things like buttons and levers and knobs and dials and all the rest of it. How far of this is science fiction, and how close are we to reality? I
think it's just starting, and it's not science fiction. It's now common to see commercials for self-braking cars in an emergency. I think we're going to see the impact of artificial intelligence first in the commercial world as jobs are eliminated in favor of machines that are more precise. And that then it will be a slower integration into the military because of that human factor, with quality assurance and then the check and balance, the command and control being absolutely essential.
It's interesting that, a lot of think tanks have looked at this and talked about this and debated this. A report by the Hague Center for Strategic Studies said about artificial superintelligence, we concur with the majority of analysts who anticipate major, maybe even existential threats when non-human intelligence exceeds its human equivalent and turns into artificial superintelligence. Who will be Homo sapiens custodian or ambassador in this debate? Christina, if one of the things we're looking at is equipment, technology, which can make decisions much faster than the human can, aren't we into a realm where decisions are being made without proper oversight?
I think, well, it's important, I think, to have that oversight there. But as we talked about before, there's areas where it might actually be better if a machine can make a decision faster than a human. For instance, the Pentagon is also working on a program to track mobile missile launchers. Those are used now by North Korea. It's something that they recently obtained, and so what that does is that really shrinks the time to detect some sort of a missile launch. Perhaps we all know they're working very hard on getting a nuclear-capable ICBM that can hit the U.S. And so if you've got a computer that can detect the movement of a mobile missile launcher faster than a human, that's a very good thing.
Okay, guys, we're going to have to leave it there, but you've done a very good job of convincing me that the world may be a safer place, and we're not going to be surrounded by killer robots. Thank you very much indeed for that, Christina Wong and Rudy Delion. And that's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Shuli Ghosh. Coming up next time, America's deadliest drug crisis. What can be done to end the opioid epidemic? Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.